Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you are new here today. We're back with the No Face t-shirt. This is my favorite shirt. Leave a comment down below if you love Spirited Away or like Hayao Miyazaki. I said that in my last video that I was wearing this shirt, but I just want to connect with people that also love Hayao Miyazaki films. In today's true crime episode, we will be diving into the Sugamo child abandonment case. Have you guys heard of this one? Disclaimer, I am in no way professional. I don't work in any areas of crime investigation or law. I just simply like to review and talk about different crime cases from all over the world, and all this information is from online sources that are available to you guys and the general public. Please forgive me if I accidentally get some information wrong or leave some information out. I definitely don't do it on purpose, and I just do my best to cover these cases as professionally as I can with what the internet provides me. And just another little warning, this video, obviously, as you can tell from the title, involves crimes against children. So today's case takes place in Sugamo, Toshima, which is in Tokyo, Japan. I actually haven't covered a Japanese case yet here on my channel, and there are definitely a couple of other ones that I have, quickly sort of skimmed over that I'd like to cover as well. So we'll start with this one. Oh, I also just want to say quickly, I do apologize. There's going to be no photos in today's episode, just because the names of basically everyone involved in this case are protected by the privacy laws. So we will be referring to people in this case as child A, child B, child C, but you'll get the hang of it eventually. So yeah, obviously I don't have their names, so I don't have any of their photos or anything like that either. So in July 1988, police were called to an apartment complex in Sugamo, Toshima. The landlord of the building had actually called the police because he wanted to report one of his tenants, as they had not been paying the rent since February that year, so about 5 months now. He also thought something was up because he actually hadn't seen the tenant since the beginning of the year, so no rent had been coming in for about 5 months, and he was fairly certain he hadn't seen the tenant for about 6 to 7 months. The landlord said a woman had definitely signed the lease and had been living there, so authorities went up to knock on the front door to get the bottom of this. Why wasn't this woman paying the rent? Is she okay? Why has nobody seen her? When the police knock on the front door, a teenage boy actually comes and answers, and the police ask him, is your mother or father here? We need to have a word with them. But the teenage boy responds saying that neither of his parents are home. The police then continue to question this boy, asking him, okay, well, when will they be back? Where have they gone? The boy then responds saying that he actually doesn't know his father and he's never known his father, and that he hadn't actually seen his mother since January that year. So 7 months this boy has not seen his mother. So obviously police were very concerned that this boy had not seen his mother, who's supposed to be living in the apartment with him for the past 7 months. And it was quite clear from talking to this boy and looking at this boy that he didn't look to be in the best of ways. He looked a bit sickly and a bit malnourished. So police asked if they could come inside to investigate further and question him more about, okay, what were the events leading up to this? So the boy let the police inside, and it became clear that he was not living in this apartment by himself. He actually also had 2 younger sisters that were living inside with him, and they were, at first glance, they could tell they were extremely malnourished and sick. And it was clear from the apartment state that these 3 children, had been left in the apartment to basically fend for themselves. The apartment that these 3 young kids were living in was just in a horrible state. It was messy, it was dirty, there was food scraps everywhere piling up in the apartment, and there was also waste just everywhere. Clearly, it was an extremely unhealthy environment for these children to be living in and day out, sleeping in this environment. And police also noted that there was a foul odor just in the apartment in general. They didn't know where it was coming from because there was so much waste and food scraps everywhere, but there was some form of foul odor. So police then found out that this teenage boy who answered the door, which we will now just refer to as Child A because that's what all the reports refer to him as, Child A was a teenage boy and he was 14 years old. Child B was a girl of 7 years old, and child D was another little girl who was only just 3 years old at the time. So very, very young kids living in this apartment by themselves in these awful conditions. As authorities were trying to find out more information about what had happened here, they realized that the 14-year-old boy, or child A, could hardly even write, and he couldn't speak very well. So it was clear that he was illiterate. Obviously, his younger sisters were illiterate as well, and the 3-year-old obviously is not reading and writing and talking that much anyway because she's a 3-year-old. But it was determined that all 3 of these young children were never educated. It seemed as though they'd never gone to school to learn to read and write and speak properly. Then child A started telling authorities that he actually had 2 other younger siblings, which is child C, who was a boy of around 4 years old, and child E, who was a little girl who was only about 1 to 2 years old. So a baby, basically. So just to quickly sum up, because I know it gets a little bit confusing. So we have child A, a boy of 14 years old, child B, a girl of 7 years old, child C, a boy of 4 years old, child D, a girl of 3 years old, and child E, a baby basically of around 2 years old. I don't have their exact birth dates because of Japan's children privacy laws, so I'm just establishing their age off the year that they were born. So they're either already this age that I'm saying, or they're turning this age, or whatever, but you get the picture. They're around the ages that I'm saying. So police were then like, okay, you've got 2 other siblings, where is child C and child E? And the boy responded saying, I don't know, they are missing. So police's concerns are just growing and growing at this stage. They're like, right, we've got 2 very young missing children. We have 3 children that were found in this apartment, malnourished and abandoned, basically. We don't know where the fathers are. We don't know where the mother is. Let's go and question the landlord, because surely he knows something about this mother that moved in, because he must have a lease or something. The landlord said that this woman started to rent the apartment the year prior in September of 1987, and she definitely had her teenage son with her, so child A. The landlord said that he had absolutely no idea that there was any other children living in this apartment. He said that because the apartment was quite small, he would have never agreed to actually rent it to a larger family of this size. So because the mother approached the landlord wanting to sign the lease with just her 14-year-old son, the landlord was obviously happy to rent it to them because it was just them 2. The landlord also said he never saw these other children moving in. She didn't have them with her at the time that they were moving into the apartment. So they suspect that either someone else was taking care of the children while the mother and the 14-year-old son were moving in, and then she snuck them in at night, or she put the children in suitcases while she was moving in so they could get into the apartment undetected. Police finally got the name of the kids from child A, or the 14-year-old boy, and when they went to look up these kids in the system to see if there was any information about them, try and find their birth dates and how old they were shocked to realize that these kids were not even registered people at all. So these kids were most likely not even birthed inside a hospital, or else they would have been registered into the system at their birth. Plus, it appeared that due to this, obviously none of the children ever went to school. It was said that child A was the only child permitted to leave the apartment complex. His mother would not let the other children leave, and he was only allowed to leave because he would help his mum with like errands and going shopping and getting food and things like that. So none of the other children were ever allowed to leave. They weren't registered into the system at all. So they basically didn't exist in the world, and they didn't go to school. So they did nothing. So then police went and took child A, child B, and child D out of the apartment, and a full investigation of the apartment and into their backgrounds started. Now, as I said before, there was a foul odor in the apartment, and when authorities were doing their full investigation of the apartment to see the extent of this neglect, they actually found the skeletal remains of child C, which was the 4-year-old boy, just in a closet. It was said by detectives, due to the state of the skeleton remains, that this child had been there for some time now, and he most likely died when he was 2 or 3, which is just seriously disturbing that those children were living in an apartment with their decomposing brother in the closet nearby to them. Like, those poor children. Even more disturbing, because it gets more disturbing, if you look at the dates, this little boy died in 1986, but the mother didn't start leasing the apartment or move in until 1987, which means this boy died before they moved into the apartment. So the mother brought the remains of her dead son into the apartment. What? He was already dead before being put into that closet in their new apartment. Child E, the little 2-year-old girl, was still missing. However, they did not find her remains in the apartment, so they were still searching for her. Interviews started to be conducted with child A, or the 14-year-old boy, because police needed to get to the bottom of what had been happening here over the past 6 to 7 months. And obviously, they found a body inside the apartment, so they had a lot of questions. How did it end up here? So finally, after conducting a lot of interviews, the police were able to establish a timeline of events that led up to this moment. So after about a month of moving into this new apartment, so in October of 1987, this mother actually approached her 14-year-old son and told him that she was no longer going to be living here anymore. She was actually going to go and live with a new boyfriend that she'd met. So he was going to have to take care of all his siblings and basically run the apartment. You're in charge now. And like, that is just so infuriating to me. It infuriates me when parents put, new lover or partner before their children. No, your children should be your number one priority, especially when they are this age. I mean, the 14-year-old was a teenager. However, the siblings were, down to a 2-year-old. Like, what was she thinking? Do we think that she was like a drug addict or had a mental illness or something? Because I couldn't find anything about that. As I told you in my intro, there's no information on any of these people online because of the privacy laws. So I have no idea what she did for a living, but I think it's safe to say she must have been somewhat mentally ill, because to abandon your children like that is just obviously insane. So yeah, she told her son, her 14-year-old son, you're in charge now of your brothers and sisters. Here's 50,000 yen, which converts to like about $350 at the time, for food and stuff like that. She continued to pay the rent on the apartment, and every now and then she would stop and check in on the kids and give them a little extra money if they needed it. How nice. Then the visits started to get less and less frequent, and in January of 1988, that was when their mother stopped in for the very last time. So after January, the kids never saw their mum again. Then she stopped paying the rent and the bills as well, which is then how the landlord eventually called the police, because he wasn't receiving any rent for months and months and months. So at this point, when the police found the children, they were living in this apartment with no water and no electricity, because their mum had stopped paying the bills and the rent. It was determined that the children's malnourishment largely came from the fact that they were eating a lot of store-bought, not nourishing food, because they had just been left with some cash, so they were just living off convenience store food. And plus, I don't know if they could cook, for one, but obviously because the power had been cut, there was no utilities, they couldn't cook anyway. Plus, because the mother had just took off for 6 months straight, I'm sure the children ran out of money very fast, so they were starving. So those poor kids had been sitting in that apartment, in that dingy apartment with no electricity, with all their scraps and waste just piling up around them for 6 to 7 months. Like, they didn't even have any fresh water, and I don't even know if they had any cash to continue to buy water from convenience stores. Obviously, the media coverage was massive on this case, because what a story, you know, you find 3 children abandoned and starving in an apartment. Mother is nowhere to be seen. They find a body in there with the children. There's another baby girl missing. It was a huge story, and it didn't just circulate in Japan, it actually made international headlines as well. Due to this extensive coverage, in July of 1988, the mother actually saw these headlines and turned herself in to the police. So obviously they sat her down and they asked her the number one question, why'd you leave? Why did you do this? Her response was that she just wanted to get on with her life and her children were preventing her from doing so. Like, are you serious? Those children were never asked to be born into this world. You brought them into this world, and now you're saying that it's their fault that you can't go and live your own life? Like, that has got to be one of the most selfish things I have ever heard. So thankfully then this woman was arrested and charged with child abandonment, and she provided the birthdays and names, I think, of her 2 sons and 3 daughters. Although we still don't know that information because it's protected, so I don't know their names or their exact birth dates. She did also confirm with police that none of her children had ever been registered, so didn't exist. They then questioned her about child C that they had found in the apartment deceased, and she said that her son had actually died when he was around 1 because he choked on something. She then proceeded to put her son's remains in a plastic bag and then put it in a suitcase, and whenever the family would move home, she would bring the remains with them. And that's how he got into the apartment. As I explained earlier, he was taken into the apartment already deceased, which is just insane. Then she was questioned about child E, the missing 2-year-old girl, and the woman said that she actually had no idea that her youngest daughter was even missing at this time, and this is when child A actually came forward and gave more information on this matter. Child A says that he actually had 2 friends in the neighborhood that were 2 12-year-old boys. These 2 friends, friend A and friend B, would often come around to child A's apartment and just hang out, and they were not the biggest fans of child A's younger siblings, especially the girls, or the little girl in particular, because they just said that she was annoying. So there was no actual reason why they hated her. On one particular day in April of 1988, which was just 3 months before authorities found the children in the apartment in the first place, the 2 boys, friend A and friend B, were over at the apartment just hanging out with the 14-year-old boy, child A. Child E was said to have been really fussy on this day because obviously she was a little baby, and she was probably fussing because she probably didn't have enough food. Her nappy was probably dirty and needed to be changed because they had absolutely nothing in this apartment, and she was probably not being taken care of, I'm assuming. Child A then said that his friend B, actually started to physically assault child E, the little baby girl, until she stopped crying, until she went silent. And it turned out that child E, the little baby, actually died from this physical assault. These 2 12-year-old boys, friend A and friend B, just left the apartment, and after this, I have no idea if child A, the 14-year-old boy, was even traumatized or upset about his sister clearly being deceased, so he just left her in the apartment. I don't think he really knew what to do in this situation, but either way, he left her body in the apartment. It was later said in court that child A was not a part of the murder at all of his younger sister. He was actually out of the apartment completely when this murder and assault took place, and it was definitely friend B that committed this murder. So now at this point there are 2 deceased children in the apartment, child C and child E. Child A then said that after about a week, child E's body started to create a very bad odor because obviously he just left her body there and it was decomposing in the apartment, so it was starting to have a very horrible smell. So child A then asked his friend A, not the one that killed his little sister, but the other one that was present at the apartment at the time of the murder, asked friend A to come and help him dispose of the body. So after putting child E's body in a bag, child A and friend A went out to a local forest and ended up burying child E's body. Now, I don't think the body of child E was actually ever recovered. I'm assuming authorities went out and searched as much as they could, but I couldn't find any information on whether the body was found, so I think it's still undiscovered till this day. So later, friend A and friend B were both charged with murder, but due to their age, because they were only 12-year-old boys, they were not sent to prison. They were just sent to a reform school until they were at the age of adulthood, which I believe back then was 20. I don't know if that's the same now in Japan or not. Child B and child D, that were the two remaining girls that were found in the apartment, were actually sent to an orphanage, and I'm not sure if they were sent together or if they went to different orphanages. But then their older brother, child A, was actually charged with helping to dispose of a body. And he was also not sent to prison. He was sent to a facility that specialized in helping children with special needs, and he would stay there until he also reached the age of adulthood. The mother was then found guilty of child abandonment and was sentenced to 3 years in prison in October of 1988. So just to sum up, child A is at a facility, child B is in an orphanage, child C is deceased, child D is at an orphanage, and child E is also deceased. The mother is in prison for 3 years and the two friends are in reform school. Now, we are not over here. This is probably the biggest twist of all in this case. 3 years go on and the mother actually gets released from prison, and someone, I have no idea who, someone thought it was a good idea to let her gain custody back of her 2 daughters that are now orphans. She regained custody of both her daughters. Oh my God. How on earth did she regain custody of any of her children, for starters? She's the one who abandoned them in the first place, which led to this whole series of events. Like, those poor children, and I hope for their sakes only that she did a better job in being a mum and raising them. And I hope that they were offered some form of education, like any education at all, just so they could then grow up and support themselves and, you know, have a happier life for themselves. But in regards to the mother, absolutely no sympathy whatsoever. What a selfish woman. Such a cruel woman. There was also actually a Japanese drama film made based on this called Nobody Knows, which was made in 2004, and probably some things in that film aren't accurate to the case, but it is based off it. I personally haven't seen the film, so I'd be interested to know if any of you guys have seen it. So there we have it. That is the Sugamo children case. It was a really heavy one, I know, but I'd actually never heard of this case before when I was researching it, and I dived down deep into the rabbit hole of other cases that I actually hadn't heard of either. So I'm interested to research some more cases that maybe you guys haven't heard of, or I haven't even heard of, or just lesser talked about ones. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more true crime videos from me, and definitely comment some case suggestions down below if you want to see any videos featured here on my channel in the future. Otherwise, I definitely hope to see you in my next video. Bye!